This is part one of Chapter 8's lecture on metabolism and enzymes. And again, we've gone through a lot of this in class, so I'm going to quickly go through some of this. But first of all, we'll start with talking on metabolism. So metabolism is the chemical reactions of life. So essentially, cells are like chemical factories where thousands of reactions are occurring all the time. For example, a cell will take energy stored in sugar and get it broken out and applies that energy to perform work within the cell. And there are other organisms that can convert energy to light, such as these fungi here that are bioluminescent. The sum total of an organism's chemical reactions is called its metabolism. So metabolism is an emergent property of life that arises from the interactions between molecules within the environment of the cell. So it's forming bonds and breaking bonds. We're going to look at this again as a breakdown of forming bonds through dehydration synthesis, the building up of molecules, which is anabolic reactions. And then the breaking bonds is the second category through hydrolysis. That involves digestion or breaking apart molecules, and those are called catabolic reactions. Most of the metabolic processes within the cells are multi-step. There usually are a defined series of steps in order to go from beginning products or reactants to a specific product at the end. And what's important to realize is that each step of this multi-step process requires a different enzyme. So bioenergetics is the study of how energy flows through living systems, such as examining these metabolic pathways. This is just a picture reminding us that dehydration synthesis is the building of something, the anabolic process, and hydrolysis is adding water to a molecule and with the help of an enzyme breaking it apart, and that is a catabolic pathway. A major example of catabolism is cellular respiration. That's when glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to carbon dioxide and water, and the energy released becomes available to the cell to do its work. Anabolic pathways are also called biosynthetic pathways, and they require energy to build complicated molecules from simpler compounds. So, for example, the synthesis of amino acids from simpler molecules and the building of a protein from amino acids are both examples of anabolism. So energy, we're talking a lot about energy. So energy is the potential to do some sort of change. It's the ability to do work. And there are different forms of energy that can do work. We have kinetic energy, which is what we associate with motion, and heat or thermal energy is a type of kinetic energy that is involved with the random movement of atoms and molecules. So thermal energy is the kinetic energy that is involved with that random movement. And then heat is the transfer of thermal energy from one body of matter to another. Chemical energy is the potential energy available for release in a chemical reaction, and potential energy is just that energy that is naturally within matter because of its location or structure. And what's good to remember is that energy can be converted from one of these forms to the other. So for example, light's energy can be harnessed to power photosynthesis in green plants. This picture shows a visual representation of the different forms of energy. So in this case, a woman can climb the stairs to a diving platform. She's releasing chemical energy stored in her cells from the food she ate for lunch. And she's also establishing potential energy as she moves up to this platform above the water. As the person dives, that potential energy is converted back to kinetic energy, which is then transferred to the water as the diver enters it. And some of the energy in this system is lost as heat because of the friction involved in these different processes, both climbing the stairs and entering the water. So these are all transformations between potential and kinetic energy. So chemical reactions release energy, and when they do that, they're considered exergonic. So reactions that are exergonic are catabolic or catabolism. They're usually the hydrolysis reactions that may result in the digestion of a polymer, the breaking apart of a polymer. And some chemical reactions require an input of energy, and those are called endergonic. So things are anabolic, like the building of polymers that occurs through dehydration synthesis. So organisms require energy to live, and they do this by combining or coupling exergonic and endergonic reactions. So this digestion and synthesis is continually going on, and so there is a release and a using of energy through these different reactions in a paired manner. Thermodynamics is the study of these energy transformations, and there are some terms that are used in thermodynamics. One is system, and the system is the matter that's being examined. And then the other, in contrast, is the surroundings to that system, which is everything outside of it. So in an open system, energy and matter can be transferred between the system and its surroundings. And organisms are open systems. They absorb energy, like light or chemical energy, in the form of organic molecules, and they release heat and metabolic waste products like urea or carbon dioxide to the surroundings. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy can be transferred and transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So this is an important first law that is also called the principle of conservation of energy. So for example, plants do not produce energy. Instead, they transform light energy to chemical energy, and that's an important distinction to keep in mind. During every transfer or transformation of energy, there's always some energy that's converted or lost as heat, which is the energy associated with the random movement of atoms and molecules. So a system can use that heat to do work only when there's a temperature difference that results in heat flowing from a warm location to a cooler one through diffusion. If the temperature is uniform, like it is in a living cell, the homeostasis of a living organism that's uniform, the heat can only be used to warm the organism. It cannot be used for work. So there has to be another source of energy for the work that cells are doing in a living organism. So energy transfers and transformations make the universe more disordered due to that loss of usable energy through heat. Entropy is the term that we use that's a measure of disorder or randomness. And the more random a collection of matter the greater its entropy. And this leads us to the second law of thermodynamics that states during every energy transfer or transformation, some energy is unusable and lost as heat. And so every energy transfer or transformation increases the entropy. Also, you could think of this as the disorder of the universe. So an example of this is automobiles convert only 25% of the energy that is stored in gasoline to actually usable motion. The rest is lost as heat. So you would know that anytime you turn off your car's engine and touch the hood, you can feel the heat. It's a tremendous amount of heat. 75% of the energy in gasoline is located in the heat that you're feeling around that engine. Living cells also unavoidably convert organized forms of energy to heat, so they only are getting a portion of the energy from stored matter. So the free energy change of a reaction tells us whether or not the reaction is going to occur spontaneously. Biologists want to know which reactions are going to occur and which are going to require an input of energy. To do this, they have to determine the energy change that is occurring in a chemical reaction. And the free energy in a living system is the energy that can do work when the temperature and pressure are uniform, like they are in a living cell. And this is where we get to this free energy change that is going to dictate whether or not a reaction will occur. We talked about this in class as Gibbs free energy. So that's that delta G, that's the change in the free energy during the process is related to the change in enthalpy, this delta H, or a change in entropy, which is the delta S, or a change in temperature, which is measured in Kelvin. And it's only processes with a negative delta G that are spontaneous. Another way of stating this is that for a process to occur spontaneously, the system has to give up some enthalpy. That means the delta H, which is the total heat of the system or energy of the system, has to decrease. And that will give us a negative delta G. Or the system can give up some of its order. So the delta S will actually increase more disorder, which is the enthalpy, in order to get a negative delta G. So the delta G has to be negative in order for the process to be spontaneous. And what that's saying is that every spontaneous process is going to decrease the entire system's free energy, because that's what delta G stands for. And the processes that have a positive or a zero delta G are never going to be spontaneous. When we have a zero delta G, what we have is a system that can no longer do any work. It's at equilibrium. So these are some examples of a system that is exhibiting a negative delta G. So these are spontaneous reactions. So here, having potential energy here and using gravity to actually have this decrease in potential energy is an example of a negative change in free energy. Or here going from this state to this state in diffusion, we're actually increasing the entropy of the system. We're increasing the disorder of the system here. And then in this chemical reaction, we're going again from this state of order to a more disordered state. And so we've had a decrease or an increase of entropy, and most likely we've also had a decrease in total enthalpy of the system because this is going to result